everyone, I'm going to be going over how to render out of Blender. I have a super basic scene set up where the cube is just moving across, just have 48 frames of animation here. I have my materials all set, camera view is all set, lighting is all set. So everything's done that I want to have finished. So rendering an animation involves two different steps. First, we're going to render an image sequence, and then we'll take that image sequence back into Blender and render it to video. But there are a few different properties that you're going to want to change before you actually render. So first of all, we're rendering in cycles because that's the higher quality render engine. It'll give you a more polished look. Now, when we're over here in the render settings, there are a lot of different things we can change, but I'm just going to go over a few that I recommend to get you started. Now, under sampling, samples are the thing that have the biggest impact on the quality of the render. So if I have a really high number, it's definitely going to be a high quality. But unless I have a particularly complicated file where the material and the lighting situation is really complex, I probably don't need anywhere near this many samples. So I recommend trying 400, and then if you realize you do need a higher number, increasing it. But it'll really save you time lowering that number. Similarly, for the most part, we probably don't need denoise on. If you have a more complex material and lighting situation, it might be helpful, but I recommend starting with this off, and you can always turn it on later. Now, next to light paths, I'm going to click on the little menu icon, choose full global illumination. That just bumped all of the bounces up to 32. In the same area where there's clamping, I'm going to set direct light up to 1. And the last render property I'm going to change is under performance. I'm going to lower the tile size to 100, and this is going to make it easier to see if there's a problem with my render settings before I take the time to actually render. Next, I'm going to come to the output settings. I'm going to set the resolution. Now, 1280 by 720 is the exact same aspect ratio. It's just a smaller size, so it'll render more quickly. So the two things that will have the biggest impact on rendering, beyond how complex the file as a whole is, are the number of samples and then the resolution. Now, if I have plenty of time to render, I'll leave this at 100%. If I need to speed things up because I'm running out of time, I might lower this percentage here. Probably not any lower than 50% because that's going to render at a particularly small size, but maybe something between 50 and 100. Like if I'm trying to go more quickly, I might try 75%. Now, next thing I need to do once the resolution is set is decide how much of this I want to actually render. So I have 48 frames of animation, but I might leave a few extra frames where nothing's happening, just sort of as a rest. So maybe I'm going to render up to frame 60 here. Now, in the output category down here, I need to change the temp location, and if you change nothing else in any of the settings, this is the one thing that you need to change, and that's because if you leave this as the default location, it gets periodically emptied and then you lose all your work, which just wastes time. So never leave this as the default location. So I'm going to click on the folder icon. I'm going to just find a location I want to render to. I can click on the folder icon to add my own folder. Then once I go into that directory, I can accept it, and that's my new location. I do recommend making a folder specifically for the renders because if you have a lot of frames, that just ends up being kind of messy. All right, so file format as PNG is fine. Now before I do the full-on render, I recommend doing just a single test render to make sure you're happy with your settings. So just choose a frame where anything that you're concerned about is visible, and then just render image like we've done previously. Because of that small tile size, it's really clear pretty quickly if there's a problem with any part of my image. Now in this case, this looks fine. I don't see any fireflies, like any little specks or anything. So I'm satisfied with the quality here. So I'm just going to close out, go back to render animation, and let it go through the entire sequence. If there had been a problem, I could have just canceled that render at any time while it was going, gone in and changed my resolution or samples or any of those different settings. All right, so the render is finished. I am going to close out. I do want to mention I probably should have saved the file before I rendered. Now this is just a quick demo, so I'm not saving anything, but I highly recommend saving before you render. And if for whatever reason your render gets interrupted, somebody in the next class needed to use your computer or we lost power, whatever it happens to be, when you go to your render folder with Finder, you can take a look at um, your renders and see how many actually were able to render. So if I had further frames after frame 60, I could start on frame 61 and then continue rendering to whatever number I need to render to. So one of the benefits to rendering an image sequence is that you can have a render interrupted, but then just keep going. Or if my end frame was 60, but I take a look in the folder and it's not actually rendered up to 60, maybe it only got up to frame 34, then I would put frame 35 as my frame start, and then I would just come over and render animation again. And I do definitely recommend saving before you actually render in case it is interrupted so that all your settings are saved. But again, this is just a quick demo, so I don't have anything I'm saving. So once your full render is finished, the entire sequence, whether it was in a single render session or across multiple, you're just going to come to File, New, Video Editing. Now, we have a few different things going on over here. We have this preview window, which shows the animation once it's loaded. We have the properties panel on the top right, and then we have the sequencer down below. We have access to the sort of a file browser on the side, but I never use that personally. All right, now when we're first starting the video editing file, the first thing we want to do is set the exact same resolution that we rendered to in the original file. Now, I know that I rendered 1280 by 720 at 75% to save a little time. So I want the exact same resolution over here. Now that that's set, I'm going to go to the Add menu in the sequencer, add an image sequence. I'm going to find my render folder, and if the sort is the wrong order, you can just click on Name over here and it'll go in numerical order. Just A to select everything, or I can use any of the normal shortcuts, B for box select, C for brush select, but just A to select all, and add image strip. So I can either scrub through by dragging the needle, or I can play through and we can see the complete animation. Now notice that it's continue playing where I don't actually have any video. So something that I'm going to want to do is whatever my frame that I ended on, in this case I know I rendered up to frame 60, I want to change that so that my playback range is just those 60 frames. And there certainly are some settings that you can adjust over on the sidebar over here. Like if things are in the wrong order, I can reverse the frame so that it goes the opposite direction. Certainly plenty of things that I can do to make adjustments if I need to. But assuming everything is the way that I want, the last thing is just setting the output location. Again, we never render to the temp folder. It's also just harder to access on the computer. So I'm going to choose a render location. I often just render the video directly to the desktop just so that it's easy to find, accept. And this time, when I render the animation, it is just stitching the images together, so it is already done. This step is very quick. Now, I do want to make sure that before I turn anything in, that I test the playback of the actual video. And that's playing back perfectly, so there's no issue. So at this stage, I would rename the file and turn it in Google Classroom. I do want to mention, though, that under the output settings, we have some different encoding options. So if the video doesn't play at all, one thing to check is the container over here. If you leave it on this setting, which sometimes it ends up on, depending on what mode you're in, it won't play automatically on the Mac. So MPEG 4 is a great option for the container, or QuickTime. H.264 is fine for the codec, but you certainly can experiment with the other settings here. But at the default, the container is at PEG4, the codec is H.264. You can certainly experiment with higher qualities and encoding speeds, but this should be good, and you can see that that was very quick. Now, unless I'm actually editing my sequence and making changes to it in the sequencer, like maybe I'm duplicating with Shift D so that I'm looping through the animation or whatever it happens to be, unless I'm making additional changes, this is probably not a file I'm going to save because there are so few settings to change that I can do it in just a couple of minutes if I need to do it again later. All right, but that is the basics of rendering your animation to video.